Well, today we are in Hale in Cheshire, a small village. We're standing outside St Mary's Church next to the grave of a man called John Middleton. And John Middleton is famous as the Childe of Hale. And he's famous because he was reputed to be 9'3" tall. And he lived the end of the 16th century, the start of the 17th century. He had an encounter with King James I and is famous certainly in this part of the world and also in Oxford for his place in history. So in this video we'll have a look at the story of the Childe of Hale. Hale is a very pretty village, not a large village, but it's full of thatched cottages and quiet lanes. There's a manor house, and down at the coast there's an old lighthouse. But the lords of the manor for many centuries were the Ireland family, and the story of John Middleton ties into that of Sir Gilbert Ireland, who lived at Hale Hall. Now Hale Hall is demolished now, though there's a nice park there. And Sir Gilbert Ireland was a prominent figure in the locality in the late 16th and early 17th century. Now Hale is just a few miles from Liverpool. It's very close, in fact, to Speke Airport and lies under the flight path for landing aircraft. And certainly in Sir Gilbert Ireland's time, in fact, through almost all of its history, Hale was in Lancashire. I said at the start, it's in Cheshire. And in the 1970s, the reforms of local government moved Hale from Lancashire to Cheshire. But I think most of the people in Hale would regard themselves as Lancastrians. But Hale's most famous son, undoubtedly, is John Middleton, known as the Childe of Hale. He was born in 1578, and there is a portrait of him which hangs in nearby Speke Hall. This is his portrait, and it was painted, so it said, to show him in the clothes he wore when he met the King James I. Now this portrait hangs in Speke Hall, and everyone who knows the story of the Childe of Hale tends to associate it with Speke Hall because it's part of the story that's told there. And once upon a time, I was a guide there, and I told the story of John Middleton, the Childe of Hale, to literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who came to visit Speke Hall. Nowadays, things are a bit different there, and they don't have guided tours in the same way, but they have gone to town, I believe, with the Childe of Hale, and there's a special area outside which commemorates him with things for children to do. But this portrait used to be attributed to a painter called Marcus Geeraerts, a Flemish painter. I think there's no doubt that it wasn't by him. We don't know who painted the picture. But this is what the Childe of Hale is supposed to have looked like up to his height of 9'3". So John Middleton was born in Hale, and according to the legend, grew to the extraordinary height of 9'3" overnight. I think we can discount that legend. And whether he was actually 9'3" or not, we don't know. But this is the height that's always suggested for him. He was a very tall person and must have had probably some medical reason for reaching such a height. But in the village, he was a notable figure, and Sir Gilbert Ireland kept him on as a bodyguard. Now, this is the house that John Middleton is supposed to have lived in, and you can see the windows on the wall. And the story is told, and it may well be true, he was so tall and the house was so small, he used to have to put his feet out the window at night, and the birds sometimes used to nest in his feet. That's one of the stories connected to the Childe of Hale. But the famous story is because Gilbert Island was quite a prominent person either when James I came to the throne or sometime later, maybe some say 1617, some say 1620. So Gilbert Island went to visit the king, or was summoned to visit the king in the court, and took John Middleton with him, where of course he was a sensation because of his height. And he was challenged by the king to take on the king's champion, and he beat the king's champion in a wrestling match. And not only that, he managed to dislocate the king's champion's thumb as well, which didn't go down well with some of the people in the court. But nevertheless, the king was impressed, and he gave him £20. But the story is told that, unfortunately, on his way back to Hale, John Middleton was mugged somehow or other, and so he lost this £20, which was a considerable sum of money in those days. And the story is he had to return to ploughing to make his living, although he must also have still been a bodyguard for Sir Gilbert Island. His portrait hangs, as I've mentioned, in Speke Hall, which was the home of the Norris family, and that's the best known portrait of John Middleton. But there is another portrait which hangs on a staircase wall in Oxford, in Brasenose College. Rather crude in its treatment, but probably of about the same age. And I remember the first time I ever went inside Brasenose College and walked up a staircase there. I was astonished to see this picture of the Childe of Hale. And the connection with Brasenose College comes through Sir Gilbert Island. Sir Gilbert Island was a student at Brasenose, and there was a long connection between the northwest of England and Brasenose College. And it's said that on his way back, or at some point anyway, when he'd been to London, he stopped in Oxford and he had John Middleton with him. And again, John Middleton caused a big sensation, and they had this portrait painted. They also made a representation of his hand. Of course, his hand was very large, and that's lost now, although I think there are photographs, of this hand. And not only that, it's mentioned, the representation of his hand is mentioned in Samuel Pepys's diary. So there's a strong connection with Brasenose College, Oxford. And from early in the 19th century to the present day, the boat used by the rowing club is always called the Childe of Hale. In Hale, there is still a very attractive looking manor house, and this wasn't the home of the Island family, but it's been here for a long time. And in front of the manor house, there is now a statue of the Childe of Hale. This bronze statue was designed by the sculptor Diane Gorvin and unveiled in 2013, and it's actually slightly larger than life size, but it gives you some idea of what he must have been like. The manor house is a very attractive building, and originally it was built, I understand, as the vicarage for the parish church, but it's been added to and made to look even grander, and various families have lived there. But it's attracted the attention of no less a person than John Betjeman, who wrote a poem about the manor house Hale. And I can remember the first verse. In early twilight I can hear a faintly ticking clock, while near and far and near is Liverpool Baroque. A poem again which takes us back to Lancashire, really. And that's certainly where John Betjeman would have understood this house to be. And I think there's a reference in the poem to soft Lancastrian airs as well. Speke Hall where I used to work is a 16th century half timber Tudor house. But Hale Hall was, although very old in its origins, was more like a sort of Regency hall in its day, and there are pictures of it in its heyday. But in the 80s the facade was still there, although it was basically wrecked, and sometime after that it was demolished and done away with completely, so quite a loss. But there is now, as I say, a nice park on the site of Hale Hall. So John Middleton died in 1623, he would have been about 45, and one hopes he was able to have a happy life. He must have had some kind of medical condition, one assumes. He may not have been quite as tall as 9'3", although that's what the story has always claimed. He was a very powerful man, very strong man, and one hopes he had a life that was better than that of a kind of circus freak. And he certainly may have done in his village where he grew up in Hale. The story of his life is a very vivid one that is frequently retold. As I mentioned, as a guide in Speak Hall, I often would have told the story, and adults and children would all sit amazed as they listened to the story of John Middleton, the Childe of Hale. And he had a more varied and interesting life than most people who would have lived in the village, who perhaps would never have wandered further than the village itself. He went to see the king with his master. He went to Oxford. He was feted and appreciated. And his story has a power that has lived on to this day. It's interesting, the power of stories. And so it's good to remember this person who lived so long ago. Stories have their own power, don't they? They become part of our lives, part of our internal imagery, part of the references we have that we take through life. So that's the story of John Middleton, the Childe of Hale, here on what I'm told is the southernmost tip of Lancashire, along the banks of the River Mersey. And it seems to become the custom to deposit some coinage here in his memory, so I'll do that now. Maybe it'll go to the church. There we go. John Middleton, the Childe of Hale.